let me get to the user perspective. From a user perspective, that these technologies have enormous potential for improving people's lives and protecting the planet. As these technologies become cheaper and more accessible, especially the application, and they will go a long way in achieving numerous SDGs. So in our report, we have identified many good examples in developing countries of using IoT to monitor groundwater contamination, use of drones to deliver medical supplies to remote communities, using big data to track diseases, and so on. But we also noticed that most of these examples remain at pilot level, without ever being scaled up to reach those most in need, the poor. To be successful, technology deployment must fulfill the 5 A's. We say availability, affordability, awareness, accessibility, and the ability for effective use. So this is the topic of today's discussion. How do we bring these technologies to those who are most in need? And what minimum conditions need to be in place to fulfill these 5 A's? So I'm very happy that Susan and Al are here to shed some light on these tough questions. And you have worked with us, with my team closely in preparing the report and thinking through these big questions with us. And then we will hear from Tata Power and Rockefeller Foundation that plan to bring electricity to 5 million rural households in India. Manoj and Deepali, we are very happy that you're here to take us through this. And then the technical success of this particular initiative rests on improved microgrid technology, and you will hear a bit more about that. And Shashi and his team at the Institute of Transformative Technology have contributed by developing a purpose-built utility in a box. And this is an innovation that protects sensitive equipment from harsh climatic conditions, could be hot summers or the monsoon rains. So Shashi will take us through some of the successful tech deployment using the 5 A's that I mentioned: availability, affordability, awareness, accessibility, and the ability for effective use. So let me thank all the panelists and invite the participants to engage actively in this conversation. And in fact, the scaling up frontier technology deployment is a subject that we are going to study closely in UNCTAD and share experience, lessons, and good practices widely across developing countries. So thank you, and I have my pen and paper ready to take lots of notes. Thank you, Angel.
Thank you very much for your opening remarks, Shamika. So as Shamika just said, we will start our webinar with 2 presentations, one by Clovis, who is the lead author of the Technology and Innovation Report, and one by Mr. Shashi Blusworth from the Institute for Transformative Technologies, which is the organization with which we have mainly partnered to bring to you this webinar. They will have 15 minutes each to share the main thinking about the issues that bring us together this afternoon. So without much further ado, Clovis, please, if you can start your presentation of the TIA.
Thank you, Angel. Let me just share it now. Thank you very much. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, colleagues. I will share with you these highlights of this report, and Technology Innovation Report 2021, that will bring this framework for us to think about how to scale up these frontier technologies for the SDGs. So the report makes the point that great divides between countries that we see today started after the Industrial Revolution. So since then, every wave of progress was associated with sharper inequality between countries. Now the gap, the average income per capita between developed and developing countries is over $40,000. But we know that few countries, notably from Asia, were able to catch up, and they were able to catch up through technological learning, imitation, innovation. So that's what we are focused on this report and this presentation. So many factors affect these dynamics of economic inequality. So including wars, epidemics, as we have now with the COVID-19, and of course the effects of trade and globalization. But one of these factors is the impact of these technological revolutions, big wave of technological change. So the report notes that the world is now at the peak of the age of ICT, as Shamika was mentioning, and is starting this new paradigm of Industry 4.0. And the deployment of ICT resulted in enormous concentration of wealth and ownership on major digital platforms. We also have persistent digital divides, as highlighted now by the COVID-19 pandemic situation. So how frontier technologies, this new wave of technological change, will affect inequalities between countries will depend on national policies and the involvement on international trade. The report covers 11 technologies, and these 11 technologies together, they already represent over $350 billion market, and one that by 2025 could grow to over $3.2 trillion. So the major providers of these technologies are US and China, as Shamika has mentioned. These two are responsible for 30 to 60% of patents and publications. The report, it presents also something very interesting, is this new index, the New Readiness Index. It gives a picture of the national capabilities to equitable use, adoption, and adaptation of these frontier technologies. In general, the economies that are most ready for this equitable use of frontier technologies, deployment of frontier technologies, are the US, Canada, and European countries. And most least ready countries are in sub-Saharan Africa. But there are clearly many outliers, countries that perform better than their per capita GDP would suggest. The greatest overperformer is India, with it ranks 65 positions higher than expected. I have other countries that also rank high, like Philippines, 57 positions, and so on. And we see that the countries that overperform, they have invested in domestic R&D, in industrial activity, in access to finance, and so on. But we also see that these countries in general, developing countries in general, they need to do more to provide access to internet and digital skills. The report, we take a look on inequalities from the perspective of the production side and the perspective of the user side. So on the perspective of the production side, each wave of technological change brings inequalities in new shapes. So today, a major concern is related to AI and robotics and automation and how this can reduce employment. But we see that the most alarmistic scenarios do not consider that not all tasks and jobs are automated. And most important, they do not consider new products, tasks, professions, and economic activities that will be created throughout the economy. We studied 3 different scenarios on the potential impact of AI on inequality between countries. This can, if the primary use of the AI is through use of data, big data generated by the users, this will mainly benefit the US and China. These 2 countries have competing digital platforms that get massive amounts of user data. If AI primarily use big data generated by Internet of Things, then this may benefit other countries with strong manufacturing, through countries in the European Union, Japan, Korea, for example. And if computers learn by recognizing patterns and generalizing from few examples, this would still demand resources and capabilities that are more likely to be found in developed countries, leaving developing countries behind. Another concern is job polarization. It is expansion of the high and low wage jobs and contraction of the middle wage jobs. But we know that not all job polarization can be attributed to technological change. A lot of that is related to outcome of trade and international competition. So for example, in developed countries from 2000 to 2020, job polarization was associated with a reduction, 4% reduction of middle skill jobs. But at the same time, in lower middle income countries, there was an increase of these middle skill jobs by 6% in the same period. So it is expected that the low and lower middle income countries will be less exposed to this potential negative effects of AI and robots on job polarization. So preparing for technological revolutions require promoting the use of this technology, the adoption, the adaptations, people to be exposed to the technology through the work. So, but developing countries, they face many challenges. The report highlights 5 of them. First is that the change in demographics. By 2050, most of the increase in population will be in sub-Saharan Africa. Firms that are there may find fewer incentives to use automation as a form to save labor costs. Another challenge is the technological gap. The risk is that low-income countries will fall further behind in the adoption of Industry 4.0, widening this technological gap. Another challenge is the slow diversification of many commodity-dependent countries. As we know, the capacity of use common technology in manufacturing, they help firms to adopt new technologies. Developing countries also have less public and private resources to fund research and innovation. And there is also the risk of stringent intellectual property rights that are likely to reinforce existing technological divides. Developing countries, they need to adopt frontier technologies while continue to diversify their production base by mastering existing technologies. So they need to align innovation industrial policies, keeping national industry competitive. This will require better access to patent technology and opportunities for technological learning through public-private R&D, for example. Some of the finance for innovation could come through impact investment, venture capital, crowdfunding, innovation and technological funds. Policymakers, they need to anticipate the impact on the workforce. They should also be able to rely on a stronger mechanism of social protection. And labor unions will have a big role to play to protect workers, particularly when we consider a gig economy and the platform economy and so on. Now, let us turn to the other side of the analysis related to the potential impact of these frontier technologies on inequality through this perspective of the users of this technology. So when you have this perspective, one of the major concerns today are related to the bias design and unintended consequence of technologies such as AI and gene editing, for example. So bias in AI systems, they can arise because they employ biased algorithms or biased data for training, for example. We have an example in the report that shows that a study found that if you sign in the Google account you as a woman, you'll be less likely to see advertisement for higher paid positions, for example. Regarding gene editing, there also a great divide on the use and test of this technology. A 2017 study that showed that most of the clinical trials are in the US and Europe. So, and also related to gene editing, we have these ethical questions that, like, what constitutes an ideal human being, or what could be the result of having people with access to this gene editing technology, but other people no. So we have an underclass of people that cannot afford this genetic treatment, for example. The report highlights that to overcome this challenge, the international community, they need to guide frontier technology to support sustainable development, leaving no one behind. So it's crucial to establish coherent technical frameworks, particularly for AI and gene editing. There are many of these initiatives, and the report lists 67 of them, but we need to move forward with this to get a broad consensus on ethical and societal issues, particularly related to gene editing. Now, another thing that Shamika has mentioned on her introductory report is 5 A's. So this is a critical aspect of the inequality in the user's perspective, and this is directly related to this theme of the webinar, the scaling frontier technologies. So access is critical for scaling up frontier technologies, and access has to be considered the broader context, not only access to the availability of technology, but it has to be availability, affordability, awareness, accessibility, the ability to use effectively the technology. Those are critical. Access to technology also could be restricted by social norms, so we have to also work on that front. So, for example, women, ethnic minorities, and other disadvantaged groups, they could be restricted to use technology because of these social norms, including the same household. So again, in this front, developing countries face some challenge, particular to developing countries, and a major issue is related to high level of poverty in developing countries when compared with developed countries. So in upper and middle income and high income countries, the average share of the population living in extreme poverty is 2%. But the average share of population living in extreme poverty in low income countries is 45%. So as a result, access to goods and services is more difficult for a large share of the population in low-income countries. In this case, the barrier is not technological at all, but economic and social barriers. Another challenge is the digital divide. Almost half of the world's population remain offline. Many developing countries do not have access to adequate digital tech infrastructure. And of course, there is also significant shortage of skills in developing countries when we compare with developed countries. So for deployment at scale, what we see is that there are a lot of course pilot solutions that will work well in one place, but these often need to be adapted to work also in other places, in other cities in the same countries, and more importantly, in other countries as well. If this does not happen, the result is just a lot of pilot projects. So between the piloting and the scaling phase, this proving technology, they sometimes get stuck. So we need to reach for, they do not reach the poor, the more disadvantaged communities. So to avoid this, governments and firms, they can consider the following principles. First, to be guided by a vision. Organizations deploying technology should start with an ambitious vision, like providing drinking water to at least 100 million people in the next 5 years, for example. They need to determine how to achieve these strategies by mobilizing the required technical, financial capital, human capital partnership, political, and other resources to move towards this big guide vision. They need to engage the users to launch a successful deployment program, because customers need to participate both in the product development and the product market phase, because successful deployment really is a function of culture, values, trust, leadership, history, politics, local customs, and so on. Need to plan for deployment. Deployment is an indispensable piece of this puzzle. Has to be at the beginning of the innovation. Has to be the idea of that. Has to be what will be the plan for deployment. There has this idea of pass the baton. The harnessing frontier technology for SDGs is like a relay race in which the innovations scientists and engineers have to quickly pass the baton to those that will be implementing these solutions, the innovators that will take this to deploying these solutions at scale. And what is also critical is that to generate income, this income generation should be viewed as an indispensable component of these solutions. So no matter how heavily subsidized this technology is, people will continue to use this technology if they can afford to use the technology. So if the solution can already include some mechanism for remuneration for income generation, this will be much more successful to deploy at scale. And critical in all this process is the role of the business models in deploying frontier technology to support inclusive and sustainable development. A recent UNCTAD paper that was a background paper for this report, the Technology Innovation Report, it has studied 24 business models for scaling up frontier technology for innovation, including the TP Renewable Microgrid by Tata Power, Rockefeller Foundation, and ITT, which we heard in a few minutes about that. This study found that 2/3 of these business models, they were digitally enabled, so really harnessing the digital technology to scale up these solutions through using apps, web platform, and so on. Many firms combine their digital side with additional goods and services. For example, agricultural app that is linked to Internet of Things for better crop surveillance, for example. Many business models aim to ease access to services and goods, so they end up bringing up new segments and the poor segments. So, for example, points of sale of hardware and management of tools in small corner shops. It's one of the examples of that. And the other thing is that a longer relationship between the supplier and the customer. So this customer relationship very strong is an essential factor through continual advisory services or upgrading within the production environment. So it's critical for governments and international committees to facilitate these business models and to disseminate them so they can serve as the basis for still other business to bring needed products and services to poor communities using frontier technologies. In conclusion, technology, we know that is rarely a solution on its own. Problems such as poverty, hunger, climate change, inequalities in all aspects are very complex and multidimensional, but technology can be part of that solution. Frontier technologies can bring transformative power, but they need to be steered with an inclusive development compass and an eye on unintended side effects as well. This is a concern for all countries, but as Shamika has mentioned, not all countries are prepared for that. We should also re-legitimize the role of the government as a critical actor for building new technological and innovation capabilities. We also have to foster civil society participation in shaping more equal and sustainable technological paths, and we need to strengthen international cooperation for facilitating this technological learning. Developing countries, particularly the least developed countries, they cannot afford to miss this new wave of technological change. Each country, they need STI, science, technology, innovation policies appropriate to their stage of development to prepare their firms and people to this rapid change. And this will require a balanced approach, building a robust industrial base and promoting frontier technology that can help deliver the 2030 agenda. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you all. Back to you, Aaron.
Thank you very much, Clovis, for taking us to the main points of the TIR and particularly focusing on these key factors for successful scaling up, which I guess is the $10 billion question. How do you get there? Although I must confess that as an international civil servant, I have my doubts about what us civil servants can say about successful business model, but that's my problem. And now we move on the second presenter, Mr. Sasi Buluswar, who is CEO of the Institute for Transformative Technologies, and he will speak about a specific instance of scaling up frontier technologies to apply to the solution of development problems. Mr. Buluswar, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angel. As the name of our organization suggests, we focus on transformative technologies. Specifically, what that means is that we've identified what we consider the 50 most important technologies needed for the Sustainable Development Goals. And we focus on building them, but equally important on partnering with companies like Tata, that we'll hear from in just a minute, to take them to scale. What I'd like to talk about, and give me a moment to start sharing my screen. There, let me know if once it's ready. Great. The thing I'd like to talk about in particular is this idea we're excited about called Utilities 2.0. And the idea there is providing a number of essential services, focusing on equitable access, on sustainability, on creating jobs, and importantly, on resilience, considering all the shocks that we're facing right now in the world. 2020 has been a reminder of a lot of things, and in fact, even as we talk about 2020, we're seeing that the world has hardly overcome COVID. Thoughts go out to our friends in India who are really struggling with the wave right now. And one mantra that has come out of 2020 is the need to build back better, right? But in a lot of places where there is not a whole lot to build on, we have to think about building forward. There is not a whole lot to build back. from in terms of infrastructure, in terms of services. And so Utilities 2.0 is about trying to figure out how to build forward for underserved communities. The one obvious point that has been made already is that as we look at population growth, increasingly lower income regions of the world will constitute a majority of the population. And as things stand, much of those communities don't have a lot of essential services. So, about half of the population in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia have access to sanitation. There is so much waste that remains uncollected. A large number of families and households don't have access to clean cooking, safe drinking water, electricity, and so on. And the good thing is, since the MDGs were launched at the turn of the century, progress has been made. And that has led to, thankfully, good economic progress, access to some services. And not surprisingly, this has come at an environmental cost. Obviously, the per capita footprint of low-income countries and communities is a lot smaller than that in high-income communities. But it is important to note that there's been a doubling of the emissions already in terms of CO2. As we project forward, it does look like, not surprisingly, that growth is going to come with a pretty big footprint. There is a pretty big risk that by the time 2050 rolls around, approaching more than half of the overall greenhouse gas and CO2 emissions will come from lower income countries. Now, we talk a lot about emissions, but it's really important to also observe that in a lot of low-income countries, there is a tremendous amount of local pollution as well. So we see this manifesting in terms of air pollution, whether it's indoors, whether it's outdoors in cities. A lot of garbage remains uncollected. Sewage it goes into waterways, and so there's lots of untreated wastewater. In addition to that, a lot of places are also feeling huge stress from water scarcity. And these trends are all pointing in the wrong direction. And as we see, again, those of us who travel to emerging economies, these kinds of pictures are hardly surprising. Now, imagine serving the needs of these communities with what we call the 1.0 utilities model. That simply won't work, simply because you have to build out a huge centralized infrastructure. That's going to cost a lot of money that isn't available to a lot of the governments. The environmental footprint, clearly, whatever has happened in the industrialized world cannot be replicated. So we have to be much smarter about some sort of a leapfrog model. And a really interesting aspect of this that we're already seeing in the Tata Power work that we'll hear about in a second is that there is no reason to think of utilities as providing only one service. So currently, most utilities, an electric utility pretty much, without exception, provides only electricity. A water utility only provides water. What we'll see is that the nature of these services and these infrastructures likely suggests that there's an opportunity, if not even need, for multi-service utilities. So that's what a 2.0 model should be. First of all, it has to be resilient. So even in a place like the United States, a few weeks back, we saw that because of very cold weather in Texas, a disruption to the electric grid in one place meant the whole state went without power for a long time. We're seeing an increasing number of fires, floods, and things of that sort that are making the existing 1.0 infrastructure very vulnerable. So resilience has to be a big part of this. Clearly, it has to be equitable. The haves versus have-nots cannot continue for too long. And as you saw in the earlier graph, the trajectory of emissions, that has to be fundamentally solved. Importantly, as we think about, a lot of the stuff that Clovis talked about in terms of automation and so on and so forth, that does pose a tremendous risk to jobs and job security. So as we think about this kind of an infrastructure, it's important that those jobs be local. The way to make it local is through a decentralized infrastructure. And as I mentioned earlier, it'll be this kind of an infrastructure creates economies of scope rather than economies of scale, which means that there's a real opportunity to provide multiple services. And importantly, as we've seen in the case of solar and smartphones and so on and so forth, there is the next generation of technologies waiting there to capitalize this kind of a point to utilities model. Some of these technologies exist already. Solar has been coming down in costs. There are really interesting ways of treating sewage. I'll talk about an example in just a second, and so on and so forth. So some technologies are either happening because they exist in industrialized markets and are being transferred by virtue of diminishing costs and so on to emerging economies. Others are very much leapfrog. So one really exciting thing that's been happening in the world is e-mobility. So I suspect that within the next few years, we'll see a dramatic increase in access to vehicles, whether it's for domestic use or for work use, through the form of two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and four-wheelers. We at ITT believe we have a particular model for doing this. As I mentioned earlier, we focus on very specific technologies that help achieve the SDGs. But importantly, before we start putting any effort towards technologies, we find companies that we believe are pivotal. Characteristics of these companies include they have to be local, they have to be established, and importantly, they have to have a strong record of working with governments to provide equitable services, whether or not it's in the particular area we're talking about. One interesting thing we observe is that the EPC, the engineering, procurement, and construction sector in a lot of emerging economies is growing pretty rapidly. And what you see is companies that are able to build data centers and buildings are also great at building and maintaining things like cell phone towers. So there are a lot of really interesting operational and strategic synergies, which are leading to companies providing services in these related areas once they get their expertise in building and maintaining stuff. And then our particular model is to work with these companies and create spin-offs that can work with governments through PPP models and go to scale. One of our most interesting success stories, we'll hear a lot more about it from my good friend Manoj Gupta in just a bit, is this partnership we had with the Rockefeller Foundation and Tata Power on solar mini grids. The broader point here we were trying to solve is that when we started this project, if you wanted to go to a village and build a mini grid, it would take you 2 months or 3 months because it was a whole project. And we transformed it from a project to a product, right? So this is now a pre-assembled system. And by virtue of today's leapfrog technologies, it's a very smart system. You can sit in Delhi and monitor what's going on in a village many miles away. And again, Manoj will talk about that in just a bit. A really interesting part of that business model is that an electric utility also needs to ensure adequate electricity consumption. And so one way to do that is to actually have these flexible, productive use services like water treatment and pumping and irrigation. The interesting thing about this is that, that time slot between, say, 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. and 11 a.m., entrepreneurs haven't started working yet. There's a whole lot of electricity that's solar power that's being underutilized. So these kinds of really interesting services allow that mix of flexibility to ensure adequate consumption, and at the same time, very valuable services that these communities don't currently have. Again, Manoj will talk a lot about the projected impact of this project that we're very excited about. Similarly, we work with a very interesting EPC company in the city of Pune called Primove, and we've jointly developed an earthworm-based vermifiltration sewage treatment system. And the way this manifests itself is, it started out with small rural outhouses in India, but now we have very large-scale systems. So the city of Pune, India, the municipal government commissioned a fairly large-scale system that treats the waste of some tens of thousands of people. So this is the size of a football field. So this particular utility service we're excited about because it can serve anything from a small household all the way to a mid-sized community that's part of a larger city. Likewise, in the era of COVID, we were able to launch, working with a number of really interesting suppliers in India. We were able to launch a service that provides oxygen to medical facilities to treat COVID patients. Obviously, we're seeing the need for something like this even as I speak in India today. I won't go into the details of the broader model, but it's important to emphasize that part of this was not just building the system, but really optimizing the supply chain so that it diminishes the need for on-site assembly, while at the same time increases the scope for local jobs. And a key part of this was actually really figuring out the business model that works across the continent in Africa. We are very excited to work with these partners. Again, the thing that binds these partners have in common is they are local. They have a great track record of successful businesses, but also inclusive businesses and operating with integrity and partnering with governments. So, we, over time, we'll continue partnering with these and other companies to expand our 2.0 model. And our hope, and we have not started this yet, but our hope is with the platform in India, we'll very quickly expand to a few countries in sub-Saharan Africa. We've had early successes in Nigeria, Kenya, and Ethiopia. And then, not surprisingly, there are a bunch of other countries where we have geographic and operational synergies that we'd like to expand to quickly. One important thing to note about our particular approach to this Utilities 2.0 is that it is not for the megacities. Right? At the same time, it will be very hard to make this happen for very small rural communities. But a good chunk of the population is in towns. These towns are very quickly expanding in small villages, in mid-sized villages, large villages, and so on and so forth. So that will be the focus of our efforts. One place where we're hoping to start is, and Manoj will show a picture of a typical village in India that they're working in, is it's this community called Gyani Mode in the state of Bihar in India. So we're very excited to work with our friends at Tata Power and get started in that. So with that, I will pause and head back to you.
Thank you very, very much, Shashi, for this very interesting presentation and what seems to me a very innovative approach to one fundamental problem of solution, is the delivery of basic services to the many communities that are underserved in energy and water treatment, in so many fundamental aspects of basic infrastructure. So we move now on to the second part of our program, where we have several speakers lined up to comment on these presentations and also on their experiences and their knowledge about the problem that brings us together today, the question of scaling up solutions, technological solutions for sustainable development. The first person in the program is Al Watkins. Al is the chairman of the Global Solutions Summit, and this problem of scaling up technological solutions for development is something that he has been working on for many years. And he has been involved in many activities in UNCTAD and in the CSTD in the past. So I'm really excited to hear what new ideas he has to share with us, some of which, by the way, have already influenced the messages from the TIR that you heard before. So Al, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Angel, Clovis, and Shamika. And it's a great honor and privilege to be here today and to have played a small supporting role in the development of TIR 2021. I think this is really a path-breaking report, and I congratulate you for undertaking this task to bring these issues all together in a very coherent and compelling fashion. It's very clear that new technology is here and it's developing and it's affecting our lives at an accelerating pace. The challenge, of course, is how to use it to solve problems, how to exploit it, how to build the capacity to make the most of it. I have a number of takeaways which I want to just lay out very, very quickly and briefly. following up on the excellent presentation by Clovis, but also Shashi, who I think raises a number of very important issues which need to be highlighted. First, the policy challenge and options as I see them is one, we can't be complacent about the risks, as the report points out. We have to strive for innovation and progress with equity. But the point that I want to really highlight is frontier technology will persist and it will progress with you or without you. The world is not going to slow down. Technological progress is not going to slow down. So the challenge is learning how to harness and scale the deployment of frontier technology, to solve problems while mitigating risks. The alternative is fall further behind. It's cruel, it's cold, but that I think is the pragmatic reality of it. But there are very important tools available. Utilities 2.0 is one of those tools, but within the ambit of sort of the UN and governments, technology upgrading, supplier development programs, technology needs assessments, all of these are critical things we need to think about. I think, as Shashi pointed out, we have mega challenges, and he raised all of those. I won't repeat it, but these are also, as he pointed out, mega opportunities for the deployment of smaller scale distributed solutions rather than large scale central solutions, which are the industrial revolution approach to these problems. I'll just give one example from UN data. Africa will have 24 million more people living in cities each year between 2020 and 2045. Being a New Yorker, I think of a native New Yorker. I now live in Washington, D.C., but being a native New Yorker, when I see a number like 24 million people, I immediately think that's the equivalent of having to build 3 new New York cities every year in Africa for each of the next 25 years. As Shashi points out, these are not all going to be, 3 New York cities, 3 8 million people agglomerations, but small and medium scale settlements on the outskirts of existing cities and new places. And there's a tremendous opportunity, therefore, to deploy, find business models, find deployment models to get these solutions out to solve the problems, as Shashi pointed out: energy, water, sanitation, health, housing, food, something we shouldn't forget, jobs, and transport. A third point I want to highlight: a technology is not a product is not a business, and a business is not necessarily environmentally, operationally, and financially sustainable. And so having the technology is the first step of along the journey. But you have to take that technology and embed it in the business, in a product. And a product is a combination of technologies. It's not one technology. A nanofilter is not a water filtration business. It's a piece of it. It's not the entire solution. So we need to build businesses. We need business models. We need deployment models. And a robot is not a smart factory. A nanofilter is not a water business. And a PV cell is not a mini grid. Deployment is technology agnostic, and all the things that Shashi was pointing out: market studies, supply chain development partners, installation, operations and maintenance, workforce training, all of these tasks have to happen, irrespective of whether it's a frontier technology or an older technology. You can't forget about them. This is what, you have the technology. If you want to reap the benefits, it's these non-technologically specific sorts of things that we need to focus on. Utilities 2.0 is an excellent ideal model of how to approach this problem. I suggest we all study it, adapt it, adopt it, and as you adopt it, find ways to improve it, make it better, make it work in your locale. The deployment ecosystem is also technology agnostic. These are all the groups and people who have to be knit together in order to make a technology into a sustainable business which delivers benefits to people in the community. But I also want to go beyond the sort of community services aspect and talk about smart factories for another 2 or 3 minutes. a quote from a Korean industrialist who spoke at a conference that I helped organize in the Kremlin from Mr. Wolfenson, then the president of the World Bank. He said, anyone can buy a sophisticated machine. Not everyone can use it to produce a globally competitive product. And so companies, it's important for us when at the UN, others not at the UN, to think about, you know, the local capacity of the companies. Does the company have the capacity to identify its technological needs? Does a company have the capacity to deploy, to incorporate that technology into its production process? Can they identify their weaknesses? Can they deploy solutions? Can they move up the technology ladder? And if not, what can we do to help them accomplish these objectives? This is a critical issue. We started to discuss it. I was doing some work late last year for WIPO, the sister organization across the street in Geneva, from UNCTAD. And we did something on technology scouting and deployment in which we talked about some of these issues. A paper about that is on the Global Solutions website. I won't go into it in detail here, but I just pointed out as something that needs more thought and needs to be incorporated into our approach to these issues. The question I have, we talk about the dangers of, or the challenges of frontier technology. If you're a second or third tier supplier and you're not a smart supplier, can you coexist in the same value chain with smart factories? If not, what can you do to make yourself smarter, and how can we accomplish this? And I think a key issue that needs to be addressed is supplier development programs. Again, there's not time to go into this at length, but how do you take a non-smart second or third tier supplier and make that company smarter, make it more able to work in the new global value chains? And don't think only of global value chains, even if it's a regional value chain. In the United States, for example, they're talking about, you know, a regional North American value chain incorporating countries in Central America, Honduras, Guatemala, Costa Rica, Nicaragua. Those suppliers participating in the North American value chain are going to have to be smarter if they're going to want to survive and prosper. And I would focus on the last box here, the one that says help companies stay on the cutting edge of rapidly changing technology. This is my last point. It's not merely a question of upgrading your technology and then going to sleep. You have to upgrade your technology and then develop the capacity to constantly upgrade. This is not a one-step process. You do it, you accomplish it, and you're finished. No, the technology is advancing and you have to be able to advance with it. This is going to require technology needs assessments. That's a critical piece of the puzzle. And so we just need to address these issues. And with that, I thank you. Apologize for being a little bit rushed, but I hope I've sort of given you a sense of what I think are the brilliant points in TIR 2021, and then some of my key takeaways and the challenges for the future.
Thank you very, very much for this very interesting presentation. I particularly like the pragmatic approach and this message of being technology agnostic and the emphasis on building the innovative capacities of firms. That is something that is very dear to us here in UNCTAD. It's a message that we always have very present, the central role of the firm in the innovative process in development. So we move now to our next speaker, who is Susan Cousins, who is professor of at the School of Public Policy in Georgia Tech. Susan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Well, like Alfred, I want to thank you for the invitation to participate in this seminar, and I'm really honored to have contributed a bit to this wonderful report. The report is very thoroughly researched, it's beautifully presented, and it's looking at a really important dynamic in the world economy. Just so the audience knows, one of the things that I did as a contribution to this report is I went through dozens of national plans in AI and digital economy and also in biotechnology. And I'm going to be drawing some on what I saw in those plans as part of my comments this morning. The reason that the UNCTAD team drew me in is because my colleagues and I over the years have done many, many case studies of frontier emerging technologies and their consequences, the way they distribute benefits, particularly in developing economies. We started out by doing case studies in innovation in water and sanitation in developing countries. And then we also had a big project done collaboratively with our colleagues in Europe that was cross-national and cross-technology, comparing distributional consequences, as we've called it. That's how the benefits get spread for emerging technologies. We then took lessons from that work and applied it in looking at nanotechnology and the potentials for nanotechnology. All that work, by the way, was supported by the U.S. National Science Foundation. I want to thank them for that support over the years. The bottom line on that work is really that emerging technologies, as produced and shaped by the market alone, do tend to increase inequalities. But those tendencies can, in fact, be counteracted with conscious design of policies and of businesses. So the question that we have in front of us is which policies and what should be taken into account in that conscious design. We have grouped the approaches to that question into three broad categories in our work: pro-poor, egalitarian, and equalizing. So pro-poor approaches focus on making life better for people at the bottom of the income scale. And the ITT examples that we've already seen, I think, exemplify this very well. And the orientation that the report gives to the Sustainable Development Goals and leaving no one behind is really powerful. A major contribution of the report is to give that orientation and send the message that frontier technologies do have a role to play here. We actually found very little of that orientation articulated in the national plans. I think India's was the only one that had any significant attention to it. So the TIR report is a very important counterweight to that set of visions that countries are developing for those frontier technologies. One of the things that we found in our case studies is that it's the role of technological champions is extremely important in the way the benefits are spread from technologies. So for national governments, the advice from our case studies is watch out for your technological champions. Who are the people or the organizations with the vision, and in particular the pro-poor vision? What circumstances do they need? What encouragement and environment do they need to actually carry out those pro-poor technological projects? The second category that we have used is egalitarian, and this refers to the efforts to reduce inequalities on the horizontal level, between culturally defined groups. Gender is a prominent example of this. So gender roles and implications in frontier technologies are mentioned in a number of places in the report, and actually in more places in the report than in the national plans, but this is to be expected given the UN's real commitment to using a gender lens in its work. The other divides don't get as much attention, but they're very nationally and culturally specific, so that's understood. The way the gender roles are mentioned in the plans, it particularly focuses on getting girls into STEM education and getting women into STEM careers. That's, of course, very important, but only a little bit of attention to actually involving women in designing community-based initiatives and projects. I think that that could be incorporated more into the kind of projects that we've seen coming up, because if you try to design, for instance, a water system in a small community of some sort, and you don't take into account what women know about how water fits into daily lives in households, it's a recipe for designing something that may not actually work in the community. The other thing that isn't mentioned very much is we have lots of talks about job and livelihood. That's really important, but really keeping in mind that there should be equality of opportunity in those jobs, and equal wage structures is really, really important. That last category that we work with is the equalizing category. This refers to actually things that change the structure of an economy in a way that reduces polarization. The national policies often pay attention to regional disparities, rural, urban divides, or areas that have been losing jobs where new opportunities can be created, and that's terrific. The area that I was concerned about in the national plans was the focus almost exclusively on high-skilled jobs. Jobs were mentioned in the ITT presentation also, but the only ones that were identified in terms of skill levels were the high-skilled jobs. My favorite figure out of the whole report was one that Clovis showed earlier. It's figure 3.5, and it shows employment by skill level in countries at different income levels. And if we thought back to that figure, we'd see that the low-income countries, about 70% of employment is in low-skilled jobs and only 4% in high-skilled jobs, whereas the high-income countries, it's about 12% in low-skilled jobs and 42% in high-skilled jobs. So that obviously sets a directional arrow. But if all that happens is to add the high-skilled jobs in the low-income environments, then you're really increasing polarization. So I am a really big advocate for focusing on using technological opportunities to increase medium skill, mid-skill jobs that also tend to be middle income jobs. Those are accessible to many more people in the economy, and will sort of set the pathway, and they actually do more to reduce polarization. I think that what Alfred just talked about in the supplier development programs, those particular places in the global value chains, has enormous potential for focusing on that level of jobs as another directional issue that can be taken up. In my last few minutes, I want to just point to some of the lessons that we learned in the cross-national case studies about the categories, the kinds of policies that do affect how widely benefits are distributed from frontier technologies. First, in terms of ownership, there were some surprises in what we found, and one of them is that whether a technology starts out in the public or the private sector doesn't really determine how broadly the benefits are spread. And of course, mobile phones is a great example of that. It's our poster child for a technology that has been distributed very widely, used in a whole lot of different ways, entirely in the developed in the private sector. The opposite of that story is actually intellectual property policies, which do affect the distribution of both business and consumer benefits quite strongly. If IP is owned by a small number of firms, they're going to have a limited number of opportunities that they want to pursue. But when IP is open, there are a lot more opportunities out there. Our example in that study was actually plant tissue culture, which was born public in the CGIAR system and generated all kinds of small and medium-sized business opportunities, including from nonprofits and commercial opportunities. So the opportunity generation is just better with more open IP. The competitive environment, which is set very strongly by national government action, is also really, really important. Antitrust regulations are not something that one often always thinks of in relation to these technologies. But whether you keep a government monopoly or whether you open up to some competition is really crucial. It was a big part of the mobile phone success story, because it was really when competition entered that telecoms market that the companies discovered, oh, we need bigger, we need more consumers, and so we need to bring down the price. And they found an older technology that had been out there that made prepaid plans available. And it was really prepaid plans that caused the big explosion. So this, of course, is going to be very important in the areas that ITT is trying to explore in utilities, where there are going to be a lot of those government champions out there. And as they are exploring decentralization is going to be really important. And then I want to just talk for a minute about what we call distributional boundaries. The kind of classic diffusion theory says that a technology is invented and spreads out in terms of use. It diffuses as the price falls. And what we found was that that diffusion process stops and gets stuck in various ways, in various places, doesn't reach the broader audiences, not just because of price at all. A wonderful example of this is actually open source software, which is used more by big companies than small companies, big universities than small colleges. And the reason for that is you need something else to actually make it work. And in that case, it's very high levels of expertise in programming. Similarly, with recombinant insulin, one of our examples, it was free under public health services, but doctors weren't prescribing it for very poor people because they didn't have the household infrastructure to support the regime. And plant tissue culture actually requires a clean room, not a reasonably high level of expertise with a few people, but the clean room's the expensive part of it. So one of the things that I'm excited about with projects like the ITT ones is, in fact, that those projects, by redesigning the environment, can change that technological boundary. They can change the infrastructure conditions and the skill conditions in ways that that let the technology produce those broader benefits. And that is something very important to keep in mind in scaling up, that those other elements are needed. And I think they're captured in the 5 A's in interesting ways. Just one last place that we unexpectedly found distributional unequal burdens, and that is the regulatory environment. It's worth thinking about whether, if low-income countries adopt the same regulatory regimes as high-income countries, are they actually bearing a higher relative cost for that? So the bottom line on this is actually it's a very wide range of policies and programs that are important in distributional benefits, not just science, technology, and innovation policy. So the national governments have lots of stuff to think about. In summary, the report, the Technological Innovation Report, not only presents a solid analysis, but also a number of really promising pathways for setting the conditions for those frontier technologies to address major inequalities. And I really look forward to seeing it widely read, widely absorbed, and then having a big impact in and of itself. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Susan, for that presentation, and also, of course, for your contribution to the thinking behind the TIR. I was particularly interested by this point that you have been making about the importance of proactive policy to counter the tendency of technology to create inequalities, and also the fact that you can have unintended consequences of policies that sometimes don't work as well or as in the direction that policymakers intended them to. That's something very important to keep in mind. The next speaker in our program is Mr. Manoj Gupta. He's the CEO of Tata Power Renewable Mini-Grids, and we already heard some very intriguing ideas in the presentation by Shashi Voluswar. So I'm really looking forward to hear more details about what they are working on now. Mr. Gupta, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thanks for inviting me for this particular discussion. While Shashi has set the flow and expectations, what can be done, I thought before I take you on through my presentation, I would like to share what the microgrid is all about, and then I'll talk about the ground reality, what we've been doing. So this is one village called Darda microgrid in Muzaffarpur district of Bihar. These are the solar panels which are installed. On the back side, if you see, you have the solar inverters, batteries, those things over there. And this from here, this overhead lines goes, this is the heart of the village, surrounded by the farms. And this particular village, so I thought it is a better way of sharing with you what the ground reality is about. While we heard through Shashi and many other speakers about what could be done. So I thought, let me share this, and I'll share with you some of the ground realities, what we have done and what we intend to do on the field, or what we are doing on the field. Okay. So TP Microgrid is an initiative of Tata Power, which has been supported by Rockefeller Foundation. This was launched on 4th of November 2019 with a vision of transforming rural India powered by power supply from microgrid. The vision of the company is to set up 10,000 microgrids, provide affordable, reliable, quality power supply, roll out value-added services, and especially when we're talking about, Shashi was talking about water treatment is one of the area where many things can be done. Drive economic growth. This is one of the bottom line which we really work upon. It's not about we sell electricity, we sell solutions, and that's what we want to position ourselves in the market. So you've seen the photograph. So typically you have, so this is the generation. Primary generation is through the solar panels. We also have started on the biogas plant. I'll cover in detail in the next presentation. We have a transmission and distribution network, and then we also have a backup energy supply sources, which have the batteries and a DG set. As we have said, 24/7 is our commitment to the customer, and we are talking about rural customers of India, where the power supply conditions have been as bad as 12 hours, which has now improved 16 to 18 hours, but still the power supply is an issue over there. So currently we are operating in 2 states of India, Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, while there are other states where the power shortage has been there. However, from priority perspective, these are the 2 states where the power supply condition is bad. So currently we are operating into UP around 7 districts and Bihar another 3 districts. We are happy to share with you that in last 1.5 years, in spite of this pandemic, we have commissioned 160 plus microgrid, which translates almost 3 microgrid per 1 microgrid in 3 days timeline, and probably it's the benchmark as of now. What we want to intend to do is demonstrate, and we reach to a mark of 200, so as to demonstrate villages that this microgrid can be self-sustained business solution, not only electricity supply. And then we want to rapidly expand to 10,000 microgrid and beyond. The intended impact from this microgrid is more on the environment side, CO2 emission reduction, and diesel usage reduction. And these 2 have been the anchor blocks for us to move forward. While we do so through this renewable microgrid, we also will be impacting new enterprises in agribusiness, which is one of the backbone in India, especially when it is agri-based country. And we also want to create new enterprises, water and irrigation. And as you know, in India, some of the places in UP and Bihar, the water quality is not as good. Some of the waterborne diseases are being there. So this new enterprise can help to provide those clean water to the community. We're also talking about creation of new green jobs. And as Susan said, that women involvement at high skill, involved in high skill job in low income environment is one of the things which should be done. And here exactly what we are doing in TP Rural Microgrid. We also will help the farmers for irrigation purpose, clean drinking water of the people, and income generation initiatives. All this will result into affordable, reliable electricity for the people and households over there. So how does the technology help us? Technology is the backbone, and it results into a deployment solution which is sustainable. Technology per se, as rightly said by Alfred, it can be bought by anybody, but it needs to be deployed in a way that the community at the bottom of the pyramid gets benefited. So first stage of our microgrids is to select the appropriate market and identify land. So here what we have done is microgrid selection is through satellite imagery, and this has been especially developed and using various experts in the domain. Then use the census data to populate initial information about the community, what type of age profile, the ratios, the income generation activities, all other things, including usage of diesel or inverters. The third thing is selection of land is very important, because in Bihar especially, there are places which get flooded during this rainy season. And we set up the plant over there, and it was last year that we have a havoc over there. Almost after 10 years of time that flood has taken place, and it has impacted about many of the microgrid. We started utilizing the digital elevation model. Now, all these things are done on a remote area, remote desktop, and the whole thing is carried out. These are results of this analysis are validated on the ground along with the pictorial things. So it's really helping us to get into a reasonable solution, which will have long-term sustainable delivery. Coming to the innovative microgrid design, and Tata works towards technology for business advantage. We have a homegrown solution which is helping us to unman operation of this microgrid. And believe me, we currently have 160 microgrids, but none of this microgrid has been manned by anybody. So as Shashi was talking about, from Delhi, sitting at Delhi or Mumbai or any other place, you can monitor what's happening over there. Various electrical parameters could be monitored. This is first microgrid in a box. While Shashi was talking about utility in a box, we have taken to next leapfrog jump, where all this utility has come inside the container with a proper air ventilation and cooling systems in place. This has provided us, even from a flood perspective or a theft perspective, this has become a very unique solution with cost optimization in place. We also have deployed a security system, as we have been talking about unmanned operation. So the security system is built into it, wherein if somebody unintentionally opens this microgrid door, there will be alarm. It will activate a mobile phone, thereby alerting the operator nearby that some intruder has gone over there. We also have started investing into smart inverters. As you all know, in the solar, inverter plays very important role. So this high quality and capability of withstanding 4 times of the initial rated current for a short duration is helping us to drive higher load, and I'll share in the presentation forward. The smart group meter is a huge contribution by Shashi and team. They have designed this product, which is through a value engineering and unique in it itself, wherein from this particular meter box, you can supply to 6 number of consumers. And the good thing is that each 6 customers can be monitored individually. Not only these consumers can be monitored, they have an alert system in place, because these meters are prepaid meters. So somebody recharge is getting exhausted, he gets alarm, the alert that within so and so day it will go. It also has a capability of checking the overload. Somebody is supposed defined for a 25 watt of load and it draws 30 watt. The meter will trip and it will send communication to the customer that because the overload is gone. Not only all this, if the payment get exhausted, it stops the current. It also have a limiting factors. If the tripping happens, automatically checks for the fault, whether the fault has moved or not, and auto reclose. It happens, it does for the 3 times and then it locks off. So this is helping us to avoid mobilization of people on the field, thereby the ability to restore power supply goes up and more transparency brings in the picture. This is an innovative solution for a large micro enterprise. And on the left-hand side, if you see this is rural place wherein he using the flour mill, the masala mills, and many 3-4 machines are being placed simultaneously. And believe me, these all run on the diesel generator set, which is almost more than 10 HP motor. Today, we have converted that using a technology called variable frequency drive, which is helping us to run such high captive load. In microgrid business, as you know, that the microgrid capacities are limited to 30 kilowatt in case of TP renewable microgrid. And one of the barrier which comes is the inverter capacity. Today, we have 15 kV inverter and suppose connected 10 HP motor over here, tripping takes place. How, because there is variable frequency drive, we are able to run. And happy to share that we were successful in operating a 50-year-old floor machine in full load condition. This is through value engineering and variable frequency drive being implemented. And this is where we're talking about how do you bring technology at a ground room solution. This micro enterprise has benefited from the saving on electricity on the diesel operation. Environment pollution is reduced, the noise pollution goes down, the productivity also goes up in this case. We also have developed fully automated billing, payment collection, and meter management system. And we believe that as we have remote operations, the customer also have to move from a manual system to a digital-based system. So today, we don't have a physical bill delivery to the customer. We uses a mobile technology for sending the bill to the customer. The customer walks to the nearest agent and network of Airtel Payment Bank, and from there through OTP verification, the data is transferred to our central database and verification carries out. Simultaneously, the transaction is verified by the bank. Once that is done, the payment is accepted, and this information is passed to the village server over there. And this village server sends a signal to the meter and thereby activating the meter. The supply is automatically switched on. Again, here, human intervention has been avoided, but leveraging the technology. All these meters are talking to each other and to the village server through a mesh network of RF network. And from here, the communication in the GPS system to the central server. This is where the technology is helping us, and we are sharing with the customer what is your bill consumption, energy consumption on a daily basis. So bringing transparency, customer convenience, and customer ownership. We believe that green energy is always better, and investment into those technologies goes in a long way, not only to have a sustainable business solution, but to provide environment which is quite workable. Now, in this case, we have been using cow dung as a raw input, which is put in the digester, and over a period of 15 days. So this gas, methane gas, start generating over here in the balloon. And from this balloon, we are putting this gas generator, which generate electricity. Now, this electricity is fed back into the microgrid, and this microgrid really help us, this gas generation help us into taking loads which are typically beyond the sunrise period, like evening loads, where if any of the ice cream manufacturing companies or any mobile tower loads which are there. So these biogeneration gas will help us. These generators have methane purity as high as 80 to 85%. We'll be replacing this diesel generator set with bio-CNG or biogas. On the right side, if you see, these are the residue of this digester process, which are converted into organic manure, which is given back to the market and the farmer to put back into the fields. We believe digital is the game, and where we have to also help the customer to move in that direction. Our payments to our landowners are happening digitally. Customers billing and access is happening through a mobile app. We also have a partnership with Airtel Payment Bank where the customers can deposit money, and on a real-time basis, the money get transferred to PPRMJ's customer account. Not only we have this digital here, we also have a Petro card which help us to engage with the local diesel operators to provide diesel for our DG sales. So we have made a foundation of digital way of doing business. Coming back to improving the livelihood village community, we believe that as India is agri-based economy, we have to help customers to move in that direction. And irrigation solution to farmers is provided through flood irrigation. We are helping these farmers to replace DG set by electrical pumps, which are powered from the microgrid. We also will be taking a pilot project on the drip irrigation. While here the water scarcity is not there, however, it also depletes the groundwater. Drip irrigation will go a long way to improve the water levels of that area. And also the cost requirement goes down because the water quantity is less, the size of the pump required goes down, electricity consumption also goes down. We are focusing on converting diesel operated micro enterprises to electrical operated. If you see over here, this is the old mill connected to the DG set, now which has been converted into a small, sleek flour mill, which have higher productivity run on the electricity. Improve the village economy. We are helping micro enterprises like creating water treatment plant units, supplying to them. We also have, as we discussed about irrigation services, we helping the local community over there to enhance their productivity using the electric sewing machines. We also are working on providing power supply to oil spillers and atta chakkis, which are the backbone of the village economy. And you find every place 1 or 2 machines over there. In some of the places, we also find the bulk milk chiller, which are used for storing milk or processing at a later end. Here we want to invest certain money so that the processing of the produce like milk could be have value addition being done, like converting milk to a curd, to a cheese, or thereby increasing value, and the community can get higher money over there. This is one way of doing it. And we're also talking about small cold rooms so that the farmers can store their fruits and vegetables for a shorter period of time to get a right price for their produce. While we do business of generation of electricity and distribution, we also creating local employability, and the more focus is green jobs. While construction, we involve local community. For operating and managing the microgrid, we deploy local youth on that places. We also have a partnership with the local landowners for microgrid plot. We also procure material, construction material from the local vendor. And these are small contribution for us to empower the local community and be part of growth. As Susan said, this is our contribution towards empowering women. We believe into empowering the local women over there to learn something new and work it out. So Village Panchayat Bhavan is the central focus area where we have this. We provide the power supply, room out, community connect we do. We also do the backward integration, that is involvement of the local village pradhans or mukhias, and the forward integration where the people who have been trained can be part of the industry tie-up. For example, some of the guys who have been vocationally trained on mechanicship can now be deployed in many of the motorcycle manufacturing or servicing centers. So those are the things which we've been doing. We focus on the computer and hardware, software as a backbone, and which is very strongly pushed by us. And these are some few of the photographs. This is the first commission site. This is the first customer shop, and you can see that this guy was having the DG supply, and once microgrid supply reached, he got disconnect the power supply on the same day. For this guy, 5 rupees also matters. And sitting over here, for us, $5 may not be a thing, but for this guy, it was an important thing. On the right-hand side, you also see the bucket manufacturing plant to which power supply has been released. And we were proud to say that during last COVID period, the power supply was released to this customer. Lastly, what we've done, this is the place which is not well lighted up, lighting of the villages. So this is a village called Sonari village of Bahraich district in Uttar Pradesh state. You can see the transformation what has been created. It is a small contribution from our side to the community, but we believe that this will go in a long way to help the community and we create a sustainable business model using the technology. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gupta, for this very interesting presentation that has brought us the ground realities of deploying in scale frontier technologies. And we are running a little behind our schedule in terms of time, but I'm sure that participants appreciate the richness of the presentations that we are hearing. Our last speaker is Mrs. Dipali Khanna, who is the Managing Director of the Asia Regional Office of the Rockefeller Foundation. And she will bring us the perspective of the civil society organizations in this effort to scale up frontier technologies for development programs. Mrs. Khanna, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. And I really want to begin by thanking United Nations Conference on Trade and Development and Institute of Transformative Technology for inviting us to join this esteemed panel. Heartiest congratulations on the launch of the Technology and Innovation Report 2021. As a science-based philanthropy, we at the Rockefeller Foundation have always been committed to leapfrog innovations and breakthroughs to advance the well-being of humanity. We believe in the potential of data and rapidly emerging technologies for transformative solutions. At present, we are looking at how we can effectively leverage innovations of the 21st century towards ensuring equitable access to all to respond to future pandemics more effectively, including work around genomic surveillance and potentially catalyzing the end of energy poverty within this decade. So that's really the context. As we all know, we have 800 million people, majority of whom are in sub-Saharan Africa, that continue to lack access to power, and 2 billion more that lack energy access that is reliable and affordable. Reliable electricity can help power economic recovery, powering rural economies across the healthcare and agriculture sectors, and helping small and medium enterprises reach new customers, hire new employees, and grow in a thriving modern economy. This is why we approach energy access holistically, in that we recognize the impact reliable energy has on livelihoods, people's income, and the need for energy to eliminate poverty itself. That said, we know that traditional utilities will not end energy poverty by themselves. Most energy poor countries have so far relied on the centralized utilities, which are monopolistic, vertically integrated systems of generation and distribution for electrification. The current energy infrastructure frameworks were designed to emphasize industrial facilities or basic street lights in population centers, but not providing universal access. In 2014, we saw over 1 billion people who were connected to the grid had intermittent access. Additionally, transmission, distribution losses were up to 5 to 10 times higher in energy poor countries than in the developed markets. It is no surprise that utilities and failing to extend the grid to remote communities has really contributed to what the situation was. And that's why we saw sub-Saharan Africa lag behind other geographies. This is where our experience has shown that distributed renewable energy systems, or DRE, are core to really the success of ensuring equitable access of energy. Decentralized, digitized, data-driven technologies have much to offer centralized power providers, including a comprehensive access strategy for unelectrified rural populations. Smart, integrated, distributed renewable energy technologies such as mini grids and solar for homes can improve reliability of supply for connections, reduce grid losses, and improve overall utility performance for the grid-connected and low-energy access countries. This is at the core of the Utilities 2.0 model that Shashi explained. Our smart power work in India really started up in 2015 to support the last mile electrification by providing technical support to decentralized renewable energy serving companies and to help families move themselves out of poverty by using reliable electricity. As I've been reflecting on your report as well, I think the 5 A's that you've been talking about are clearly put into practice through the work that we are doing in India around energy access. We've seen that mini grids with a 30 kilowatt capacity provided a variety of direct and indirect benefits, ranging from job creation to increased agricultural production through multiple cropping, growth of new businesses and jobs, and powering of school and health centers. Across all the people that Smart Power India serves, small businesses that now get power through these mini grids have seen an almost 50% increase in their revenue and their incomes. And going back to the point that was made earlier, keeping people in the center is so important to see the kind of impact that we want to see across all the technological revolutions that we want to get to the ground. We also saw that most of these enterprises were women-headed, and that's why the economic gains were getting reinvested in the welfare of their children, their nutrition, access to school, and really helped to lift the entire communities. Today, through the work of Smart Power in India, we have 475 renewable energy mini grids with an installed capacity of 14.4 megawatts that are operating across 3 states in India. The electricity from these grids is serving close to about 400,000 people. The results were really inspiring. When we looked at what happened between 2015 to 2018, the energy consumption increased for shops to about 35% and 52% for commercial enterprises. This proved for us, in fact, what we believed in theory, that access to sufficient and reliable electricity is indeed transformational, and its domino effect on education, health, and livelihoods can be immediate. Looking at this success, we've taken this work down to Myanmar and Sub-Saharan Africa and are actually taking it global. We have, of course, been working with different organizations and trying to really test new technologies and business models that could take decentralized renewable energy from really being an off-grid alternative to becoming a mainstream component of widespread rural electrification. And I think that's a theme also that kept coming up in the previous presentations. How do you really get this to scale? This is exactly why we have this partnership also with Tata Power Renewable Microgrid, where Manoj just told us the phenomenal work that has happened in a very short span of time. Now, none of this would have been possible had we not invested in figuring out the right technology for the purpose, especially one that keeps the customer's interest at the core. And of course, ITT has been an amazing partner, and we've heard everything that has been possible through the design that they've created, as well as on the other side, hearing from Manoj, how that mini grid in a box is really, or utility in a box is really helping to fast track setting up these mini grids, doing all the things, whether it's remotely monitoring where the customers are wanting more demand for energy, or looking at where they need to be getting new enterprises to really enhance the demand. So I think it's been quite spectacular to see how the foundation, our investment in technology is now being put to use and is really ready to go to scale. What we've been able to do for this work is really helping us now to see how we can be really taking this work to a global level and look at a range of breakthrough technologies that, will really ensure that we can reach and serve the billions of people that we want to be serving. In addition to our work with ITT, we are working on creative demand aggregation models to help reduce the cost of solar PV and battery storage technologies to realize economies of scale to advance the DRE market. It will take bold action to bend the climate curve and ensure we give 1 billion people the power to access modern healthcare and education, as well as an opportunity to participate in a thriving economy. Investing and working together to support the solutions that provide power to the people and communities that need it most. But protecting our planet is the only way for a true recovery that is inclusive and protects the planet. I think we've heard the word equity many times during the session, and I really hope we are going to be serious about it. And it will take all of us, who are in this conversation today and many others to really make that a reality. Additionally, a number of innovative policy changes will be required to build on the current progress. A combination of all such of these initiatives can really achieve what none of them can do individually. Even with significant funding and technology, will always be a co-enabler for this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much, Mrs. Khanna, for that presentation. I think it's very important that organizations like yours with global reach can share the knowledge that you are getting from participating in initiatives such as this, and see how they can be replicated and adapted and spread into other development contexts. It's really been a very interesting discussion today. We are running, as I said, a little behind our schedule, but I think we should use the opportunity that we have of having this distinguished panel of speakers with us to ask a few questions about the experiences that that you are gaining through the implementation of these projects. The chat is open for those of the participants who want to ask questions, and we already have one that is not addressed to anybody in particular, so I will throw it to whoever wants to take it up. The question is, what best practices can you impart to a third world country like the Philippines, who is struggling to cope with innovations? I would suggest, yes, that you concentrate on just one best practice, because I'm sure that there will be dozens of those. But perhaps if some of you, perhaps Mr. Gupta, since you have presented a very detailed example of a specific set of issues, you could illustrate us about what would be the best practice that you would like to see replicated in other countries.
Thank you. My recommendation is to understand your customer and provide solution. Today, many of us fail to provide or connect technology with the solutions. So don't go for a technology, understand what the customers or the community over there needs, and think for the solution, wrap around the technology and other things around it. That's all from my side.
Anybody else will want to comment on that, or no?
I agree with that, but I also want to say there are great innovations happening in Philippines. We're working with the UN on the Pinting Lab, so I'm more than happy to take that conversation online. But there is a lot happening. We just need to be, using a rigor of evaluating, where things can be taken to the next level. But there's a lot in Philippines itself.
The next question in the chat is perhaps addressed to Mrs. Susan, is about how the implementation of frontier technology, how can we implement frontier technology and make sure that the wealth gap will not become larger between developing and developed nations? I think that is the question that the TIR in its entirety was intended to address, but perhaps if you can concentrate on one aspect of the distributional effects of frontier technologies.
The TIR actually addresses both within country inequalities as well as between country inequalities. I would suggest really focusing on pro-poor innovations that need to be frugal. We haven't talked about frugal innovations per se here, but simpler, more sustainable, in various ways. But then actually there's a huge market for that across the lower income countries. So I think that's something that both it helps to reduce inequalities within countries. It supports the development process as a whole, the multi-dimensional development process, and creates a lot of market opportunities for national firms as well.
Thank you very much, Susan. There is at this point, there's no further question on the chat, but I would like to ask Shashi a question about the utility 2.0 model that came to my mind as he was presenting the model, and this of course is a model that is digitally enabled. Digital technologies are fundamental for it. And we have seen in other aspects of the application of digital technologies that there is a very powerful trend in digitalization towards power concentration, market concentration. And market concentration and power concentration tends to work against equity because excessive power in the hands of a single operator or a few operators is not very good for equity. So how do you see that threat in the context of utility 2.0 model? And is that a problem, or maybe not so much because of the specific emphasis that you're putting in deploying technologies in certain contexts and in markets that are carefully selected? How do you see this problem?
You know, whether it's a private model, a public model, or a PPP, you can have good actors and bad actors, right? So it'll be very important, particularly to address the issue of, things like price gouging and so on and so forth. It'll be very important to ensure that there is that transparency and accountability through appropriate regulations. And we have found that, this is emerging, right? Over the next 20 years, there'll be more and more companies doing this kind of stuff. And in many ways, Tata is a great example of a company that's done the right thing, right? And so I hope that we can learn from some of these best practices as other countries start putting in regulations to do these kinds of PPPs.
Just want to add one more thing. I was pretty impressed with Albert's suggestion that mega challenge brings mega opportunities. And further, he says that technology anybody can buy the technology, but put that to use is the thing which really is essence on the ground. So today, when we look at the customers, and especially the rural customers over there, they are not bothered about what technology you bring in. They are only bothered about how their business can grow, how their life can improve. So those perspectives are very important to keep into consideration. And the society, we are giving the solutions. So some of the societies which are still at a very nascent stage of usage of electricity, for them, the lighting solution is more than sufficient. You bringing them solutions, other things may not be really valuable for them. So, and some of the societies have moved from not only the motive powers, they're going into digitalization part of it. So the reliability of power supply also becomes so important. The cost becomes secondary part of it. So that's the way I was coming. The technology with the business and the ground reality of the customers are the assets.
Thank you very much for that comment, because I think that that's a very good thought to end our conversation, since I don't see any more questions and we are already almost half an hour beyond our scheduled time. But I think it's very important to remember, particularly for those of us who have been working on science and technology for very long, and we tend to get very excited about the technology. It's very important to remember that the technology is not what matters. What matters is what we bring with technology to improve the quality of people and to make the world a better place and a fairer place for people to live in. So with this, I would like to thank all of you for having spent these almost 2 hours with us, particularly to our partners from the Institute for Transformative Technologies for helping us put together this webinar, which I think has been very interesting, and I hope it has been useful for the participants from the developing countries that have been joining us. Thank you very, very much again, and we hope to be interacting with you in the future in this work to really make technology work for equitable development. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you.